aboard!
Hey, what's up, everybody? You're listening to Cannabis Karaoke, where we ask you to grab the mic and tell your story. Get inside info from today's most interesting cannabis pioneers, and from the first note to the end of the song, listen up as you get to hear the stories of success on Cannabis Karaoke. All right, welcome to another episode of Cannabis Karaoke. We have a great guest on the show today. We're going to welcome Osiris Santos. He's head of product and innovation for Americann Made. And, you know, hopefully throughout this next hour, you're going to get to hear a little bit of a different angle from Osiris and how he integrates cannabis into his life, as well as a little bit about the company he works for. Hey, man, Osiris, it took us a minute to get together, but I appreciate you jumping on the show, man. And
No worries.
Tell me a little bit about what you do and what sets Americann Made off a little different than, say, most of the companies that are out there right now.
Well, Americann Made is an interesting company. It's a vertically integrated company, so we do pretty much everything you can think of in the cannabis space, from multiple retail operations to cultivation. We recently started a new brand called Hotbox. It's a flower brand. It's a smokables brand. We have flower. We have a few other products coming out, concentrates and vapes. Anything you can smoke. it's all smokables. And yeah, so we basically we were kind of birthed out of one operator owning a store, which the original store was called Hotbox, and that's kind of the nostalgia in the name. And he's grown pretty big, and now has this vertically integrated like ecosystem that we created a group to support it, from having just building out a company to have different verticals to manage marketing. I come from a very design heavy background, from designing beautiful things like graphic design in the beginning of my career, to marketing, and also doing a lot of UX and product design. So that was kind of one of the unique ways I got into the cannabis industry.
So when you stumble across like a business like this, and it's, one of the reasons why I was excited to talk with you, because there's not a lot of these episodes in the state of California. They exist outside the state, but it's a tricky navigation to be able to pick up the ability to do retail as well as develop your own brand, as well as, kind of the whole vertical component. When you kind of came up on the company, you went to work for them, having come from the background, which I'd love to have you drop a few names of who you've worked with, but how do you take that approach in a more, like, how do you take what you learned in the traditional world and apply it to what's going on here? Because you do have a lot of moving pieces that you have to consider, both in the brand space as well as the dispensary space.
Yeah, so coming from a design background and then and marketing, everything really in that is just, when you a lot of people think of design as, people that just come and make things pretty or make things look great, but it's kind of a full scope thing where it's about how it makes people feel. It's about the story you tell. It's about how great you make things function. And in this industry, we've been constantly in a constant evolution in many sides of the industry, from the recreational side to the medical to the business in general of how people operate. We have regulations constantly changing. So coming in from a product and like UX background, whereas UX is user experience, it's kind of just understanding a totally different product. Because as a designer, if you if you practice design heavily, you're going to work with a lot of products within your career, hopefully. And every product is a little different, but it's still a product. You're just trying to understand the psychology of the audience that's there and how to best serve them.
So I'm going to go ahead and encourage you to, you came from two pretty heavy hitting companies, or at least that's what you told me.
Yeah.
Disney and EA, which,
Yeah.
they just did a big deal with Star Wars, and, that was an interesting crisscross. But when you come from that level, right, where you have a lot of resources at your disposal, you have what I would consider a more stable environment, not just from the forward-facing consumer side, but pricing and distribution, and to your point of regulations, and it's not without saying that you guys came you're in San Diego, correct? That's your guys' home base.
No, I'm actually based out of LA.
But I mean, the company itself, the dispensaries that operate are out of San Diego, which is some of the hardest,
Of them, yes.
the harshest, or at least the least to jump on the wagon out of the whole state of California when everything was going legal. San Diego kind of held back a little bit and did it a little bit different than most people. So how do you go from EA and Disney, if you will, atmosphere, environment, resources, to the cannabis space? What was your biggest kind of eye-opening experience when it came to taking those traditional tools to a somewhat non-traditional space?
So actually, it's a good point you bring up about like a lot of these roadblocks and frustrations, or just pain points in the industry. So I've been doing UX for quite a while and design and working for different, like I've had a few startups of my own, some flopped. There was like two that did okay, one did pretty good. And we had a good sell. And then I got kind of burnt out on startups after being in them for so long, and I wanted to check out what it was like to be in the big brands. So I started working in some medical companies and like doing UX for them, and also some travel and leisure companies. And from there, I had started getting into cannabis then, and thinking about the business, because I actually moved here from Florida. I lived in Miami. I came from Hialeah. I grew up there. I don't know if you're familiar, but I was learning about the cannabis business because Florida was planning on voting for it. And at the time, I was doing, like I said, I was working for a travel company, and I was also I was always like doing my own businesses on the side. So I was partnered in a gym at the time. It was like a CrossFit and powerlifting gym. And while I was thinking about the business, I kind of just found a way. I was trying to think of like what I would start in the business, like how do I get in the business in Florida? And in doing that, I kind of partnered up with a client out there that's been a good friend. We became friends through business, and he wanted to try something new, and I told him about cannabis, and we kind of just jumped on the mission of just let's figure out how to start a cannabis company in Florida. At the time, the law didn't pass. The law was on the bill. It didn't pass, and we had raised some money, and we're like, well, we can't quit now. Some people didn't want to stay in, and some people wanted to drop out, or like stay in and see what we could do. So we just looked for opportunities anywhere. We looked in like Boston at the time, and California was kind of our best bet. So we started a cultivation facility out in the desert in Cathedral City. And that was my first introduction to cannabis. It was just coming in from not really knowing anything, and just knowing a few investors and a little bit of the startup world, and jumping in that way and started to grow. And through that is how I met, obviously, the network that I have in cannabis, and how I got tied with this company. I ended up parting ways from that company, where I sold my piece in there because I didn't really do anything there besides like I kind of bootstrapped my way into the industry, and invested what I had into starting this grow, and had found some partners to join the ride. So within that time, I met the owner of this shop out here called Kushmart, and he had a shop in downtown, and that was the first project that kind of started like in the cannabis industry doing like design and marketing. I needed to help him with some, or they needed just some basic marketing help. Um, and from there, kind of just, I realized like there's not a lot of like design skill sets and marketing skill sets. This is like almost 5 years ago already.
So like
Um,
2014.
yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, exactly. So then we he just started introducing me to other stores he had, and the empire started growing there. And we now it became this bigger vertically integrated company. We've been very conservative and stayed very compliant to kind of last this long, because that's another thing, right? It's like there's been these waves of regulation that have hit, and you kind of seen people disappear. Um, and luckily, we've been a very stable company, and haven't like really uh, played on the dangerous side like some of these companies.
Would you say that, and I'm going to use a horrible gaming reference, but would you say like being in the cannabis space is a lot like playing The Legend of Zelda, where you keep doing a level and then you forget one piece of that level and you got to go all the way back to the beginning and do the whole level again? I feel like that's when you talk about regulations, that's the wave that hits people is they'll do everything they think they're supposed to do and then bam, they get kind of sent back to the very beginning. Um, how did
Yeah.
how did that play into your guys' strategy? Because a lot of companies, to your point, what you were saying, dude, they just go hell's bells and just go a million miles an hour. And sometimes that works, but sometimes you end up driving right off a cliff. How do you pace yourself in an industry that everybody doesn't go one day that I don't walk in somewhere that someone doesn't go, dude, what's up with cannabis? Like, how do I get in? What's going on? I mean, this is 5 years later. 5 years ago when I was jumping in, everybody told me I was crazy. I'm sure they told you the same thing. What
Yeah.
how does that play into, I'm going to ask you a little business strategy, then I want to pivot back to kind of where where your strengths are in the space, which is the UI and everything, and the UX and the whole experience, which I believe is one of the missing components of cannabis. But how does one like yourself, and everybody that's listening, by the way, just got a really quick overview of how you start someplace in cannabis sometimes and you end up somewhere else, but you bring along and learn and build your book of business to where bam, now you're 5 years later, which feels like 50 years later, and you're like jamming along in a business. How do you guys know when to pump the brakes and when to stomp the gas? Like, what's your trigger points for that kind of stuff?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't know how deep I could go on that answer, how well I can answer that, but um, I mean, I think part of it is just having the discipline to remain pretty conservative on how you follow a lot of these rules, because like something as simple as taxes that could bring down a lot of people. So I mean, if you're not, you know, really paying attention to what's going on, and also just having the foresight to um, hire the right staffing, which takes in an industry where certain things didn't exist before and now they're starting to pop up. Um, you know, being able to have a little foresight or have the people to do the research and understand that, hey, we're going this way. We need to hire these type of talents um, to just keep going and keep evolving. I think that's one strong point that we've had, like one strong asset that we've had, and we have a lot of talented people in our company that come from outside of the industry, um, which has been pretty helpful because you get a lot of different perspectives coming into an industry that's um, there's elements of, and I'm not trying to downplay it or anything, but like there's elements of like old culture that it's a little more laid back, and it's the business strategy wasn't the same back then. It was a little more hustle and just sell pounds, and it wasn't as regulated where now everything has to be packaged and things like that. So I think it's really all in like the foresight of how you build out your team.
Yeah, I would get questioned about that all the time. Like, how do you hire? And you see some companies hire, and you know that they're like their brother-in-law that was, took a class of marketing at a social, and a social class at a Cabrillo, at a little college that's near you. And compared to guys like yourself who come in from the outside, like when I talk about hiring, and I tell this to people all the time, we're hiring like we would, I am anyways, and it sounds like you guys did as well, where you're looking for people that already have a book of business, that understand the space, and that actually play a position on your team that's not being filled. I think that's a real critical element, because everybody wants to jump on the ride and everybody's excited about working for a cannabis company, but can they actually perform in the space when it's game time,
Yeah, and that's, and that just means you have to, I think one of the things that help you be successful is how fast can you adapt, especially coming out of, a very systematic corporate structure that has its flow if you're there or not.
So when you guys are, game planning, or when you're getting ready to do, marketing and innovative things for Americann Made, how are you trying to tempo against the user, right? Because a lot of you see certain brands out there that and you guys have a unique polarity in the sense that you have a brand that's out in market, as well as you have a door that sells other brands, so you kind of get the testing of both sides. But when you're looking at going after that customer, it seems to me that the ones that really understand who, everybody has a mentality of like, I want to sell weed to everybody. And that's a great approach. But when you're thinking about a brand and what you're trying to accomplish, what aspects do you put into it, and how do you try to reverse engineer who you're trying to target for that brand? Let's speak about Hotbox a little bit.
Okay. So Hotbox, that came out of like, what was great about it to us, it was just that Hotbox is a nostalgic time. So in the perspective of how you mentioned, like just in the light of trying to market to everyone, that's kind of something that applies to a lot of people, like a huge age range and gap of people. We basically focus on that part of the nostalgia. Maybe that's a little bit of my Disney background, focus on nostalgia. But because Hotbox was kind of like a first time for the operator, in the sense of like that was the first store, and for a lot of people, hotboxing is typically like a first time experience, or it's a very memorable experience your first time. We wanted to tap into something that tapped on nostalgia, so it gave you kind of like the feel good vibes that that are really relevant to weed, and also the more serious side of what we focus on is being our background and understanding like regulation and being conservative, and also trying to understand the customer and what they want to purchase, is also focusing on providing a good quality product. And I know that's like gets blurted all the time, but we grow it, so we know what a good quality product looks like because our hands touch it, and that's an important thing, because not to blow anyone up, and it's just not everyone grows weed. Like not everyone grows flower. Like that's not a common thing across brands. Brands, that there's a lot of companies are just brands. They source flower, and so we try to focus on the quality of the product as well. Because what if you're a brand and you can't get good flower anymore? How strong is your brand going to be? Because it's going to be partial brand in this business. To get heard and make a connection, but then your product also has to be good,
I think you're dead on in the fact that there's a lot of what you would say is white label brands, which no harm in foul, you know what I mean? Like those are good things and we need them, but I think there is a little something to, and you're seeing it more and more, where people are building what we call, and not in any way, shape, or form is it a reflection of your actual business level, but small batch style operations where, you can run a brand and, if you have access to $50 million worth of cannabis, you got that brand going, right? But if you're doing what you're doing, you can only grow and turn so fast based on consumption. So it is a lot of the feel, I think where I'm seeing and a lot of people have discussed is when do you think we'll see brand connectivity actually happen? I mean, somebody that, I haven't had a chance to have somebody on the show like yourself where you mentioned Disney, you mentioned EA. Those are two companies that really focus on building a relationship with the product line that they're developing. And there's an emotional attachment to that. That seems to be your biggest asset from what I can gather. How do you do that with a cannabis brand when people are looking cross-eyed half the time and there's so many different branding elements taking place? How do you win that customer? What do you do differently? You've already spoke to the fact that you touch the product and you know what's coming on. Like, now, how do you get them interested? I mean, Hotbox, we've all done it. How does it get to the next
Yeah.
step towards in somebody's pocket?
So, and that's where like mastering the value proposition works, right? Like, or happens, because it's not just the brand and how cool or cute it looks. It's also, like I said, it's your product, how you communicate that, and also how you align yourself with the consumer looking for a good quality product. One thing that we've done as well that kind of helps out, and it's also a new thing that we have to educate more about, is have you heard of Envriocann or any of these third-party certifications coming out right now?
Shout out to Envriocann and Ian for getting involved with you guys, it sounds like.
Yep. So that's one partial strategy that we use. Just
explain that a little bit, though. I don't want you to glaze over that. That's an important thing, I think, in our industry that a lot of people are failing to really grasp.
Thanks for highlighting that.
Absolutely, bro. I've been a big fan of it since Jump. When he's in Santa Cruz, I'm in Santa Cruz, so we know each other really well. But tell me a little bit why you made that choice, or why the company made that choice.
Well, the company made that choice. It's a stamp of approval. I mean, if we could, which we can't right now because it's a federal thing to be an organic brand, we would be an organic brand. But that's a federal certification. So luckily, there's companies like Envriocann, and there's a few others around the country I've noticed trying to take on that fight, which is great. But there needs to be education about it. And what they do is they certify your business and operation as a clean and safe company to purchase any product from. They have an organic certification. They also certify retail. So it's a good symbol to look for to kind of understand who's taking the responsibility, because it is an undertaking for the business as well to potentially change their process and how they grow, and which supplements and anything that they put into the flower that kind of certifies that there's no harmful anything going into your product, which I honestly don't know how popular it is right now, but I know back in the day when I first jumped into the industry, buds looked like ridiculous. Like, they were the size of fists, and there was like tons of steroids and different things in flower. So having a certification like this kind of certifies that you're not using anything harmful for your body. So it's like, if you care about your food, which cannabis is, it's not food, but it's something that you put into your body. I mean, it should take the same level of care in that.
Yeah, I mean, I think for a long time, and thank you for that. I think it helps, and people, again, like, this is an organic shout out to them. If you Google them, I'll make sure I put it in the blog post afterwards.
Not paid for this. They are. I mean, I just think it's awesome that they exist.
Well, and it comes from people. It comes partially, I think, from people wanting to have that stamp of approval, but also partly, I think we're in an industry, oddly enough, and I hope we can keep it this way for a longer period of time than shorter, but people care. People actually want, there's people like yourself who, you're not being forced. There's no regulation for you. There's been no mandate that said, hey, you got to have this stamp of approval in order to do this. You're doing it because you want to produce a better product that's safe for the customer and possibly the patient on top of that. So I commend that, and I think more people should demand it. And I think the educational component is a slow roll because there's so much noise. But I think
Totally.
people
And
like
that's
your,
the
go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, I was just saying to that point on your point on branding is just there needs to be more efforts like this to kind of drown out the noise, because everything is about, there's a lot of similar stories. There's only so much so much you can change about a certain narrative, but yeah, just this is what changes their narrative. It's like, what are you doing to be responsible with things that you're putting in my body,
Well, and listen, man,
yeah.
I know that I've personally consumed probably gallons of Miracle Grow in my life, including mold. And I mean, if you're in the
Totally.
space, if you jumped in early, there's a really good chance you either grew at some level or you were a duffel bag person. I don't want to say boy or girl, but you were involved in some transactional level, even if it was selling, eighths on the corner after you bought an ounce for yourself. Regardless, like we're entering a phase in time where we're actually getting ahead of this. It took us 100 years to realize, hey, don't put lead in wine and don't do this with alcohol. Like to go, oh wow, that's really bad for us. Let's change how we do that. We're actually kind of preventatively or proactively trying to establish our own standards without any, which I think helps. Do you think that helps regulation down the road? I mean, when we self-govern?
I think it. I think so, because if it's anything like the music industry, it's like you gotta come prepared. You gotta come with the band already like put together. It's nice if you have an audience that understands what you're talking about to have some support. So yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the responsibility we have to take if we want to make this acceptable everywhere. I mean, there is a lot of education. I mean, we're people don't realize we're technically like in the middle of what it took alcohol prohibition to happen. We're only halfway through what that took. So I think there's a lot of education that needs to be done.
Talk to me about Osiris in a day when he's using cannabis. What does that look like?
When I'm using cannabis?
Yeah. Like when do you smoke weed, right?
I do.
All right. So how do you prefer joints? I have like different things for different reasons. What's your makeup?
My preference is gonna be a joint. I love rolling joints. I am a craftsman of in many things, and joints is one of those things that I really love doing.
That's funny, man. I ask that question of everybody because I want to know, what people do during the day.
Totally.
I'll vape, when I'm working and doing whatever, and then, dude, like, to me, smoking a joint with somebody is like cracking a beer, or going to the bar. Like when I get a chance to smoke a joint, I almost am guaranteed great conversation, and if nothing else, like a nice joint. And it's helpful when you have somebody I'm looking forward to one of your craftsman joints in the future.
Yeah, no doubt. I got you. I just like it. Even sometimes I take breaks where it's like a month or 4 months, and I'll just to kind of cleanse or something. And in that time when I'm not smoking, if there's people smoking around me, I'll still roll their joints.
That's awesome. Thank you for that. You should get there
No.
should be a button that you get to wear, like official joint roller, Did you see that thing? Do you follow basketball at all?
It's funny. So I don't really follow sports. But I did when EA. I was at EA Sports.
Well, I was just gonna say, Swaggy P just threw Kerr out under the bus. He said, Kerr's like the best blunt roller in the whole NBA. We just gave him that kudos. So go check that out. I think it's pretty funny how sports and cannabis are starting to kind of be synonymous, and which is kind of what leads me to the next kind of direction I want to go. It's like we're in a space where when we used to do business, we'd go have a lunch. Maybe we have a cocktail or 3, depending on the type of lunch it was, and business, and that was cool. But if you stepped out to smoke a joint or pulled a vape out in the middle of that meeting, you're done. And I just interviewed a guy that works for a large capital firm that came from traditional capital. I was like, do you ever see the day where you could fire a joint up in the middle of a financial conversation and not have somebody freak out on you? So Tell me about that. Tell me how that changes. I mean, it's not like people are going outside or maybe they are at EA and Disney and smoking a J real quick. How does that influence your
Definitely
life?
not.
How does that, what does that look like in our life when we're able to kind of intertwine that acceptance to be like, we're in the middle of a meeting, go, do you want to smoke a J? Let's go smoke a J real quick. Go outside, smoke
Well,
a joint, come back in and keep going.
I can't say we do that at our company. Because like I said, there's people that smoke, there's people that don't. Everybody has their role, and not all of it is necessarily culture. Um, so yeah, like at work, for me, I definitely try not to smoke a lot, just because I need to function a certain way. I like smoking more when I'm doing like creative things. Um, Especially like I still also, when I started here, I did a lot of like the creation, and I still do some of the, like our photography and stuff like that. So probably like in editing, when I'm editing, a lot of that stuff kind of puts me in the zone. um yeah, and typically like I like doing it when I travel. When I travel, I like to always, one thing I like to find is even if the weed sucks, because in most countries the weed's not as good as here, obviously. I like to go on the mission of trying to find weed.
Tell me, what do you, I've kind of skipped over it, but being that you're a flower slash joint guy, it's always a good question to ask.
Yep.
What do you like to smoke? What strains? Like, what are our favorites?
Man, right now, not as a self plug or anything, but I've been smoking like our Skunkberry just because it's really tasty. And a lot of people like it, and it has like a very berry smell. So I've been using that for like a as kind of like a regular. Sometimes I stick to like a lot of classics. Sometimes I try to get some exotics and check those out, but yeah, like Gorilla Glue, I always like that stuff. I and One thing I do miss that I used to have in Miami a lot more is cheese. I haven't seen a good cheese around for a while.
Take note, all you growers out there, find the cheese.
Yeah.
Get it over to Osiris. He needs some of the cheese.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I mean, it's a very like I think it's like a super Miami strain though.
do you think it's because of where it's grown, or why do you say it's just Miami? Is it because that's
No,
like
I don't think it's just Miami, but I think it's like a typical Miami strain. I think
huh?
I when I've heard of it in other places, but I mean, in Miami, you can almost always ask for it. I think, like at least I've been able to.
No, I mean
But
different regions like pull on different things. I mean,
yeah,
sour diesel, like the East Coast loves sour diesel, for example.
yeah, sour diesel's a thing there,
You know what I mean?
and
So it's like certain
yeah,
areas just like, to your point, Gorilla Glue, it's like certain areas just smoke certain things. Kush, LA is renowned for its Kush. Like everybody likes the Kush. So it does get interesting when you roll up. My favorite is Durban Poison, if I can find it,
oh, we
just gets me
just
amped.
I'm gonna put a quick drop. We're about to drop that
A Durban?
actually. Yeah,
Bro, hook me up, please.
I got
I
you.
love Durban Poison. Like when I'm gonna go work in the yard, or like I'm kind of like yourself, where if I'm gonna smoke, I want to be kind of ready to just chill. I don't want to have to do too much more work, and if I can, you know, s-
Unless it's adventuring, I'm down to adventure high.
what is that? Well, yeah, of course. If you're gonna go hike in the woods, or I love going surfing
Yeah,
high, like the whole bit, you
I
know.
just got into surfing.
Oh, dude,
Yeah,
we got to hook up. Like I'll come down and surf with you. I've been surfing for a bunch of years. That'd be fun. I
I'm
gotta.
down.
I love introducing people to the sport in the right way so that they enjoy it. And it's sometimes you get yelled at a little bit out in the water, so you got to be
I don't
careful.
know if
But
I'm starting the right way. I got a short board to start.
good for you though.
It's a
Do whatever.
it's a it's a foamy, but I figured it'd be fine because I do boogie boarding and I stand up on my boogie board. I
There
have
you
a
go.
stand up boogie board.
It's all about
So
learning your core and like your rail to rail. Do you snowboard too?
I'm good at longboarding, like downhill and a
Oh,
few
cool.
things, but snowboarding I suck.
Well, it's the same core, right? It's like skateboarding, surfing, snowboarding. It's all sideways sports, so you're using kind of the middle part of your body to surf or to skate or whatever. That's rad, dude. You should be. You have some good surf down in that area. I like to go surfing when I'm down there with my friends. Where do you tell me this. You've been involved for, I'm just going to set the record straight. 5 years is the equivalent of 50 years in any other industry. So while we may not physically age, we're mentally aging in this
Oh
space.
man,
Where
yeah.
do you see cannabis going? Like California's going bananas. I mean, we saw dispensaries go away. We saw trap houses still exist. Like you got other states emerging. What's the play? Where are you banking? Like, I think it's other states in addition to California. What are your thoughts about that?
I mean, yeah, for sure. I think other states are going to continue to grow. I think I don't, a lot of people wanted to go federally, like legal. I don't know if that's like I'm not like holding my breath for that one. It might, but there's so many variables that like it's hard to predict that. Um, but I think yeah, more and more states are going to just keep on going in the path that they are. We're like, how many states are we at already? Like
I think
we're
there's
pretty.
22 that have like some sort of medicinal law on
Yeah, I
the
feel like we're
books. I think it's 16 or 15 or 16 like recreational, and then probably 10 that are really doing anything. Pennsylvania's an interesting state.
yep.
They didn't let
Been up there.
flower happen. They decided to let concentrates and edibles happen. It's like those poor
That's
people.
that's how Florida was.
The poor people, dude. It's like give them the most like get them really high right out of the gate. Like here's a concentrate or here's an edible. It's like, dude, that doesn't always work for most people. It changes when you smoke it. It's delta 9. When you eat it, it's 11 hydroxy. So it's like your body does different things with it. And I just feel bad for those East Coasters that are having to, still bootleg weed, flower, and because they can't get it.
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting thing. I think we're just gonna. I think we have to find the happy median, right? Like regulation has been back and forth quite often, which is the big reason why people go down because it becomes pretty costly if you don't watch out. But even with something as simple as packaging, that's a huge investment for any company. But I think we're gonna find the happy medium at some point with regulation. Yeah, I don't know what the path is for being federal. That I think that's still really foggy. But I think California and Denver are always like going to be an example for every state to kind of base their decisions off of. I mean, it seems like that's the case already. With a lot of the states, I'm seeing how they're like if you look at like Massachusetts, Michigan. New York has been kind of stalling
Dude,
a little
Michigan
bit.
is it's like they're flipping a light switch out there. We're on rough. We're on rough. We're on rough. We're open. We're not. We're open. We're not. And it's just like at some point, the real
I
value is going to have to be, like you said, like some stability.
Yeah, I think it's just there's a lot of it's as a politician, I don't think that that's an easy thing to be on either side because you know I think everybody's just scared like what if my state's the one to mess up and like I don't want to deal with those like there's a number of problems that have happened in certain states so it's like I don't want to deal with that or that so it's like I can see all sides of it like there's a lot of people that want it and as sad as it is like there's politicians that just that they might not want to be the one and that's a I think that's part of the sad truth of this is with those back and forth states. I mean, Florida's been pushing forward, but they've gone through a lot of the same stuff that sucks. Like they started with no smoking, so it was just vape and edibles. But then you couldn't grow, so there was no real product around, and it's interesting. I'm not sure where it's gonna go, and especially with now CBD and what's happening with that, like whatever they're trying to figure out regulations for that.
Talk about
And
something
that
that just slipped through everywhere. Like I'm seeing CBD stores getting opened everywhere right now. Like it's a little bit
it,
interesting. You
it's
go to your liquor store now and you could buy, right next to the Black Rhino, you got a CBD pill now, and it's like, does that help us? Does that, what's the,
I don't know. It was a little shocking. I think the most recent trip I did to New York, um, I was just walking around Soho, downtown, and a few places, and it seemed like I couldn't turn a block and walk down an entire block without seeing like at least 3 businesses offer some type of CBD something. Um, so what scares me about that is just like being on the inside of seeing how cultivation runs and what it takes to have a safer grow and all that, and what it takes to have that much discipline is like, where's all the CBD coming from? Because I don't know that many grows in existence, to be
Well, I
honest.
think all of Oregon and a lot of people in Colorado who, they hit a ceiling on cannabis as how much they could sell. I mean, Oregon's market is really sometimes referred to as a race to the bottom. And I think
Yeah, I've seen that.
a lot of those farmers are, they get the opportunity to, really focus on, you know, growing a product that doesn't have restrictions. Like they can ship it across state lines. I mean, you saw that bust that happened with those guys in Oklahoma. They got busted with all that CBD weed or hemp weed, and it's like, it's interesting. A lot of people are pivoting from growing cannabis in certain states that it's already got a saturation level, and then you kind of combine that with people's lack of education. Like I saw Abercrombie and Fitch is going to start selling CBD
For
now.
like lip balm.
I don't know, dude, but I mean, in a way, it's
No,
like,
I've seen it in a lot of products, and the sad thing with that is a lot of the big brands I see, it's not even CBD. See, like I don't have a problem with CBD being out there. I mean, I think weed's awesome. Like I mean, people. I think we should take as much precaution as we can possibly take, and be as educated as we possibly can. But we need to be responsible with it, and also, I mean, sure, I think it's a pretty good miracle plant. I mean, it does so many things, but I think those are some of the things we might be missing out on, is like, what else can this do besides get us high or cure some pain? Like there's a lot of like material goods that you can create out of it.
like
Um,
just building material. I mean, the thing is like we literally are sitting on top, of a revolution.
yeah,
And it's a global one. It's not just related to, it used to be like, oh, let's get high, let's go to California or let's go to Colorado or,
yeah,
whatever. Now it's like, dude, I've smoked a J walking down the street in Las Vegas and nobody says anything. I mean, in a state where before, if you had a roach, you were going to jail for 6 months. So we're literally sitting on top of a revolution, and to the extent of our politicians and lawmakers, they don't even know how to handle it. There's so many chemicals that are coming out of that plant, CBG, CBN, THCV, THCA. Like we're getting away from what strain and how much THC does that have in that, to like, I want you to comment to that actually, and more to like terps and the other components. I mean, we used to throw out batches if they tested it, like really low
yeah.
or whatever. Now you're like, oh man, they're a 1-to-1 CBD. Let's go a different direction. Like talk to me a little bit about how you guys are, some people are blending, some brands are out there blending for experience, calm, you know, like climbing, sleeping, whatever. How are you guys dealing with that shift from I want flour that's testing at 28 to 31%, which is a unicorn, and like when it doesn't even factor into how it affects the person?
So, we're definitely, some of our strains are in that range.
That means you know what you're
Actually,
doing. It's unicorn.
but also one of the things I got to say about that we maintain is we don't our numbers don't fluctuate batch to batch. Like we're pretty we may be off like 2-3 points maximum, if ever. And that's very rare. Um, so that's one thing, and not all of our weed is that strong, because that not everybody needs that much. Just depends on what you want it for and what you're using it for. Right now, I can't go too into that part, but we are toying around with some products right now that do touch on like feelings and vibes. That's kind of an exploration thing. Right now, we're definitely sticking to a lot of classic strains and a few exotics. And one of the things with us is because we're growing, we're not constantly pumping out different strains. We typically try to perfect a strain for quite a while before we ever even put it on the market. So it's always we put the time into like really perfecting our strains so that way they can stay as consistent as they are right now.
Well,
And that's one of the biggest things we focus on is consistency.
I just want to offer my services if you need any product testing through that process. I'm glad to
No
help you.
doubt.
I'm glad to help you out. If you got any extra weed that you need to know how it acts, let me know. Um, how are
Noted.
you? How are you going to maintain a pivot? Like I do see that happening more and more. And actually, it's funny
Hmm.
because there's a spectrum of customer, right? You have everything from the stoner / weed head to soccer dad who's just hasn't smoked anything since he left high school and he's 45 now. Like those people are going to be into the more feeling style or entourage mood style stuff versus stoners and weed heads are still going to want to know the strain, the THC, the breakdown. Like, how do you
Hmm.
market to both of those, or do you even care? Do you just focus on what's selling for you guys?
I think it's a balance of all those things. You don't want to overextend yourself on an effort that's not going to keep your company afloat, but also you do want to provide a quality product. So for us, at least, we don't speed into a lot of things that need a little more research. We try to every product we put out, we put a lot of time into it and nurture and care, especially like regarding strains. We don't just buy a seed or grow a seed and figure, this first one's going to go. Like we try to get it to a certain consistency before it comes out. As far as approaching the feelings, I think that's valid. Um, and that's something that we're exploring now, but that I think that's going to take for any brand that's going to take some time to understand what that even means, because that's going to take a number of, again, different skill sets, talents to break down the chemical breakdown to really understand how it's affecting people. And I don't think that we have. I don't think that those brands are doing anything wrong, but I don't know that we have the depth of research needed to fully get there yet. I think we're kind of like treading lightly on that, on feelings right now, but at some point, I do think we're going to dial that in a little better than what we have.
Do you still think
Like
you'll see
like
both?
pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, yeah, you'll see. I that's exactly kind of where I was going in the sense that people have purchased other things a certain way, and when you walk in as a new user and you go, and the guy starts or the gal starts ripping out a bunch of stuff, and you're like, I have no idea, just want to know how it makes me feel. I do believe that there's always going to be a subset of customers that kind of sit in that zone.
And there is, but again, that goes to education, right?
Yeah.
And really, I think figuring out a lot of this messaging, because I think before a lot of the messaging was, look at this lifestyle, look how cool we are, and now it's becoming more about, this is what's in our product, this is how we grow, this is, I think that's part of a lot of people's narratives is starting to change a little bit. Um, so I think it's just on educating what any of this stuff means, and figuring out how to communicate that better. And like, again, that Envriocann like certification, that's one way that you can start the conversation. Um, and really just in kind of talking about it more in what you tell to your people, like on in any other channels that we have, like Instagram, your website. I mean, and really getting involved um, in a lot of these community events to kind of voice all this, because I mean, it's still very it's becoming very big brand, but there's still like a kind of a old school aspect to it where there's a lot of guerrilla stuff that still needs to be done. And I
It's
think that's where some brands are really like shining, is how much they get involved in the community.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely a paramount component is that, there's so much culture that got us to where we're at, but then like
Hmm.
now it's just going at light speed. And how do we stay, it's so hard to say stay true to the roots because the roots are kind of evolving. Like nobody's growing
It's like
with,
music, right? It's
yeah,
like hip
absolutely.
hop or anything like that. That was a very street thing, and it became mainstream. It's literally how most people create a narrative is typically off hip hop culture these days. High fashion, streetwear, like almost every industry kind of takes a note from hip hop these days, you know?
No, for certain. And I mean, there was a minute where it was, you know, it was kind of action sports was driving the boat for a minute where, you know, even in the Midwest, you saw people wearing surf, you know, boardies and t-shirts and,
Yep.
you know, and then that faded, and skate's still kind of influential in the shoe market. But you're absolutely right. I think we still have to we have a long ways to go. It seems like we've been doing this forever. But
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, it stokes me out to do it every day. It sounds like it stokes you out to do it every day. And,
Yeah.
you know, believe it or not, we've been doing this for about 50 minutes now. And I want to kind of be thankful of what you shared. I mean, for what people are going to get to hear on this one, it's a great insight to how a brand is built, or how a certain brand is managing and building itself, and kind of some key points for consumers to look at. Like, pay attention to what you're smoking, pay attention to what goes in your body, just like you would with food or your water or anything else, and demand that, because that's really what's going to change the space, is when the consumer sets the bar and the brands have to adhere to it.
Yep.
Dude, tell me where we can find you personally if you want to share that, and then of course your company's social, and then any shouts that you need to give out, and then we'll let you get on your way.
You can find me on Instagram, I guess. It's my name. It's Osiris Santos. You'll find some of my art endeavors there. I do a lot of photography and creative things that I share there. And then our brand, you can find us at Smoke Hotbox. That's our website. That's our Instagram. That's pretty much any channel that we're on. It's Smoke Hotbox. Yeah, that's who we are. Americann Made is our website. If you're into more of the business side, you can check us out there. It's Americann with 2 N's. So it's Americann Made, MADE.
I'll definitely make sure I put that in the blog when we put it out. And dude, thank you so much for jumping on. It's been a pleasure to speak to you, and hope to talk to you again down the road, when in 6 months it'll feel like we were doing this for 3 years.
No doubt, man. We'll do.
Thanks, Osiris.
All right. Thanks, man. Ciao.
That's a wrap. Thank you for listening to this edition of Cannabis Karaoke, another kick-ass podcast about all things cannabis. You can find us on iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, and our website, cannabiskaraoke.tv. And if you or someone you know would like to be on the show, please hit the book your interview button on the right. Cannabis Karaoke. Grab the mic and tell your story. Wow.